Hello, welcome to Boring History. Have you ever felt like you were at a crossroads in your life? A moment where you asked yourself, who am I, and what do I really want? These are questions we all face on our journey of self-discovery. In the hustle and bustle of today's world, it's easy to get lost, chasing after other people's expectations and forgetting the voice of your own heart. But deep inside each of us, there is a flame of uniqueness and a story waiting to be told. Today's video is not just a journey, but a true adventure into your own inner world. Together, we will learn about the paths that have led many great people to true success and happiness. We will explore the secrets of courage, perseverance, and how to listen to the whispers of your soul. Let's embark on this special journey together, to find the best version of yourself and live a meaningful life. Prepare your mind, open your heart, and explore with me. In a land where mists constantly hug the rolling hills, where the roar of the sea echoes tales of the past, a legend has begun to unfold. It is a land of dark forests, and tiny villages nestled in valleys, where light is just enough to chase away the darkness for a moment and then return like an old friend. There, the whispers are not just stories, but a living entity, slipping through the cracks of rocks and into the wind, carrying a fear that no one truly understands. The murderer, who would later be called the Constellation Man, emerged from that darkness. He was not a man, but a lost soul, caught in a vortex of forgotten astronomical secrets. He was a gamer of fate, a mad poet who wrote his verses in blood and mysterious letters. He believed he was performing an ancient ritual, a terrifying rebirth of the constellations he worshipped. And he had chosen this land, with its deserted streets, babbling brooks, and lonely houses, as the stage for his deadly drama. On the first night, two young people were on their way back from a date under the pale moonlight. They were laughing and talking happily, as innocent as young grass under the spring breeze. But then, from somewhere in the dark night, a car suddenly appeared. Its headlights were like the eyes of a monster, causing them to suddenly feel a chill running down their spines. The car stopped, and a cold, quiet voice like an echo from the abyss rang out. There was no anger, no hatred, just a cold, chilling coldness, as if it was a job he had to do. He had said, his voice like the moans of trapped souls, that he had to do it to keep the stars aligned. And then, he had carried out his brutal act, without hesitation, without remorse. He had left only a mark, a strange symbol drawn in a red liquid, a circle with a cross on it, as a declaration of his brutality. The event sent a wave of panic through the area. The police searched, but there was no trace. The killer had disappeared into the night, like a nightmare that disappears when you wake up. Yet the symbol remained, a scar on the soul of the land. Hunters, who had once been brave, now feared to venture into the dark forests, and fishermen who had sailed at night now dared only to sail by day. Everyone sensed that something had changed, a curse had been cast. And then, a letter arrived. It wasn't a confession, but a game, a challenge. The letter was written in intricate script, like a code that only the most insane could decipher. The constellation bragged about his deeds and challenged everyone to find him. But the strangest thing about the letter was a piece of paper torn from the shirt of one of his victims, and part of the code he had created. Codebreakers, who had solved the most difficult cases, gathered together. They were people who had spent their lives studying the secrets of the stars and numbers. But when they looked at the code, they felt a chill coming from within. It was not an ordinary code, but a curse written in letters, a whisper of a mad universe. They tried, they worked day and night, but they could not find a single rule. Time passed, and another case occurred. This time, the victims were a couple sitting in the park. Just like before, the constellation man appeared out of nowhere, like a monster from a fairy tale. But this time, he used a gun, and he brutally murdered them. He left behind another letter, another challenge, and another piece of paper. And on that letter, he wrote a sentence that became an obsession for everyone: "I like killing people because it's fun." The anger and fear of the people had reached a boiling point. They demanded that the government do something, that this murderer be caught. But how do you catch a ghost? How do you catch a shadow? The constellation had become a name, a symbol of fear. He had become part of the stories told in the darkest nights, a figure in nightmares. The constellation man's second letter caused a storm in the community. He sent another letter, this time to 3 different newspapers. In that letter, he described his crimes in detail and challenged the police to find him. But the strangest thing was that he demanded that the newspapers publish part of his code, a 408-character code, or he would kill 12 more people. The newspapers were faced with a difficult decision. Should they comply with the killer's demands? Should they become part of his deadly game? In the end, they decided to publish the cipher. All 3 newspapers published the constellation's cipher, and immediately, cryptographers from all over the world set to work. But the cipher was not simple, it was like an endless maze, a cruel joke played by a madman. The code was not a game, but a mirror of the murderer's soul. It was not just words, but the whispers of a soul trapped in darkness. The codebreakers, who had once been confident in their abilities, now felt like failures. They tried their best, but there was no rule. It was like an ancient story, a story that no one could understand. Meanwhile, the Zodiac man appeared again. This time, he killed a taxi driver. He shot him dead and stole his car. But the strangest thing was that he left behind a piece of cloth from his shirt and another symbol, a symbol of a clock, a circle, and a cross. He sent another letter, this time calling himself Zodiac, a name that became an obsession for everyone. The curse of the constellation spread like wildfire in a dry forest. It was not just a case, but a story. A story about a man who declared himself Lord of the Stars, a man who wrote his poems in blood and mysterious letters. And that story, like a nightmare, became a part of everyone's life. In the days that followed, the letters continued to arrive. Each letter was a piece of a giant puzzle, a game that only the constellation could win. He challenged the police, he taunted them, and he sent them new codes, more complex, more difficult. The codebreakers tried, they worked tirelessly, but they could not find the answer. Another letter came, this time to a newspaper. He wrote that he was ready to attack a school bus. He described in detail how he would do it, and he drew a diagram of a bomb. He sent a challenge, a threat, a curse. And then he disappeared into the darkness, leaving behind an indescribable fear. The police searched, but there was no trace. They patrolled the streets, they checked school buses, but they could not find the constellation. He was like a ghost, a non-existent person. He became a legend, a story that old people told their children on dark nights. And that story, like a curse, was passed down from generation to generation. The constellation is not just about cases, it is about a collapse. The collapse of a community, of a society, of a belief in what is right and what is wrong. The constellation has destroyed all of that. He has made people afraid, he has made people suspicious of each other, and he has made people lose faith in themselves. That night, a young couple was out for a walk. They stopped in a secluded spot, and the constellation man appeared again. This time, he did not shoot, he did not strike. He spoke to them, his voice like an echo from another world. He spoke of the stars, of the secrets of the universe, of the curses of the constellations. He said that he was an emissary of an old god, a forgotten god. He left another letter, a letter filled with mysterious words. He challenged the police, and he sent another note, a note with a strange saying, "One day you will know who did this." And then he disappeared, like a mirage. The case caused a storm in the community. People were scared, and they began to suspect each other. Anyone could be the star catcher, anyone could be part of his deadly game. And in the meantime, the star catcher sent another letter. This time, he sent a piece of another victim's shirt, and he described in detail how he had done it. That letter made everyone even more afraid. It was like a curse that had been cast. It was like something that had been torn out of a fairy tale and brought into the real world. And in the meantime, the constellation man sent another letter, this time calling himself the Zodiac Killer, a name that became an obsession for everyone. And then, a man deciphered part of the code. He was not a professional cryptographer, but a school teacher. He deciphered the first 140 characters, and he found a sentence. A sentence that scared everyone. "I am a murderer, I will continue to kill." But that wasn't all. There were still many more characters that had yet to be deciphered. And the constellation sent another letter, this time detailing his crimes and daring the police to find him. He would never be caught, he wrote. He was uncatchable. He was a madman, a mad poet, a mad murderer. And he became a legend. The fear of the people became a part of their lives. They learned to live with that fear. They learned to live with the constellation. He became a part of history, a part of the stories told in the dark nights. And that story, like a curse, was passed down from generation to generation. And when night fell, the constellation appeared again. This time, he killed a man who was walking down the street. He shot him dead and left behind a piece of his shirt. And then, he disappeared into the darkness, leaving behind a curse. A curse that became a part of everyone's life. In the days that followed, the letters continued to arrive. Each letter was a piece of a giant puzzle, a game that only the constellation could win. He challenged the police, he taunted them, and he sent them new codes, more complex, more difficult. The code breakers tried, they worked tirelessly, but they could not find the answer. And that story, like a curse, has been passed down from generation to generation. A story about a man who declared himself the Lord of the Stars, a man who wrote his poems in blood and mysterious letters. And that story, like a nightmare, has become a part of everyone's life. The constellation didn't just kill people, he killed peace. He killed the belief in a safe world. He made people afraid, he made people suspicious of each other, and he made people lose faith in themselves. And in the meantime, the constellation sent another letter, this time calling himself the Zodiac Killer, a name that became an obsession for everyone. In the days that followed, the letters continued to arrive. Each letter was a piece of a giant puzzle, a game that only the constellation could win. He challenged the police, he taunted them, and he sent them new codes, more complex, more difficult. The code breakers tried, they worked tirelessly, but they could not find the answer. And that story, like a curse, has been passed down from generation to generation. A story about a man who declared himself the Lord of the Stars, a man who wrote his poems in blood and mysterious letters. And that story, like a nightmare, has become a part of everyone's life. In the days that followed, the letters continued to arrive. Each letter was a piece of a giant puzzle, a game that only the constellation could win. He challenged the police, he taunted them, and he sent them new codes, more complex, more difficult. The code breakers tried, they worked tirelessly, but they could not find the answer. And that story, like a curse, has been passed down from generation to generation. A story about a man who declared himself the Lord of the Stars, a man who wrote his poems in blood and mysterious letters. And that story, like a nightmare, has become a part of everyone's life. Just as the stars had always been there, unchanging, so had the constellation. He had become part of the universe, a force of chaos and death. And all the while, the seekers continued to search, but they found nothing. They searched for a man, but they found only a shadow. And that shadow, like an ancient tale, was passed down from generation to generation. After the last scroll was sent, an eerie silence fell over Nova Roma. The people, who had once lived in prosperity and security, now walked the streets with suspicious glances. Every dark corner, every whisper of wind could be the zodiac. The code became an obsession, not only for scholars but also for the workers in the fields, who saw his symbol on the sacred stones. Children no longer dared to play in the woods, and fairy tales were replaced by whispers of a cloaked murderer. In the Imperial Library, where the glow of golden torches once dispelled the darkness, scholars now sat in the silence of defeat. They were masters of astronomy and mathematics, but the codes of the zodiac seemed to come from another world, where their rules no longer applied. An elderly cryptologist, with weary eyes and white hair, threw the scroll down on the table and lamented, "These are not the codes of a man, but the whispers of an old god, a forgotten god." And then, another case occurred. This time, the victims were not a soldier or a couple of lovers, but a priest of the sun god, a man respected by all. His body was found on the top of a sacred hill, right next to an old stone altar. On his chest, the symbol of the zodiac was drawn in blood. This time, he left no scroll, only an obsidian stone carved into the shape of a leaf, and on it, a single line, "The time has come." The indignity of this case shocked the entire empire. The murderer had not only murdered, he had challenged the very power of the gods. Legions were mobilized to protect the temples, and patrols were increased. But there was nothing anyone could do. The Zodiac had become a shadow, an uncatchable spirit. And fear had become a part of everyday life. A group of young scholars volunteered to join the search. They were not professional cryptographers, but lovers of the secrets of the universe. They began studying ancient texts, aboriginal prophecies, and forgotten star charts. They believed that the Zodiac Code was not a random string of characters, but a language of the stars. But the deeper they delved into these secrets, the more they felt a chill coming from within. The Zodiac codes were like a mirror, reflecting the chaos coming from within them. The letters were not just symbols, but whispers of a forgotten world, a world of old gods and ancient curses. And then, one of the young scholars, a man named Caius, made an astonishing discovery. He found an ancient scroll, a scroll written in a long-forgotten language. In it, a story was told about an evil spirit, a man cursed by the stars. The scroll described a sacrificial ritual, a ritual that could only be performed at a specific time of year. But the scroll was more than that. It had a code identical to the Zodiac's. But this time, it wasn't a random code. It was a reflection of the stars. Each letter represented a star, each line a constellation. The Zodiac wasn't just a murderer, he was a mad astrologer who wrote his oaths in the stars. Caius and his friends tried to decipher the scroll, but they could not. The language was too ancient, too complex. They sought help, and they found a woman, a priestess of the moon goddess, who lived in a cave in a remote land. This priestess was the last survivor of a long-forgotten tribe, and she was the only one who could read the language. The journey to the priestess' cave was a dangerous one. They had to cross treacherous hills, great rivers, and dark forests where the curse of the Zodiac had spread. With every step, they felt a chill run down their spines, as if something was watching them from the darkness. And then, they reached the priestess's cave. The priestess welcomed them, and she listened to their story. She looked at the scroll, and her eyes sparkled like stars. She said, in a low voice, that the scroll was not an ordinary scroll, but a mirror that reflected the soul of the Zodiac, a soul trapped between two worlds. The priestess began to read the code, and as she did, a story emerged. A story of a man who declared himself Lord of the Stars, a man who wrote his poems in blood and mysterious letters. He believed he could recreate the stars, and he killed to do it. She deciphered part of the code, and she found a sentence. "I will never die, for I am part of the stars. I will be reborn, and I will return to complete my ritual." That sentence made everyone afraid. The Zodiac was not just a murderer, he was a curse. The priestess said that the scroll was not a solution, but a warning. She said that the Zodiac had chosen someone to continue his ritual. And she said that it was one of them. Then she disappeared into the darkness, leaving behind an indescribable fear. Caius and his companions returned to Nova Roma, carrying the scroll and the priestess prophecy. They told their story, but no one believed them. They said it was just a fairy tale, a story that old people tell their children. But Caius did. He knew that the zodiac was not a person, but a shadow, a curse. And he knew that he had to find it, before it was too late. He began searching, not just in scrolls and star charts, but in the people around him. The story of the zodiac has become more than a story of crimes, it is a story of a forgotten truth. A truth about curses, about old gods, and about stars. And that story, like a nightmare, has become a part of everyone's life. In the days that followed, the letters continued to arrive. Each letter was a piece of a giant puzzle, a game that only the zodiac could win. He challenged the legions, he taunted them, and he sent them new codes, more complex, more difficult. The code breakers tried, they worked tirelessly, but they could not find the answer. And that story, like a curse, has been passed down from generation to generation. A story about a man who declared himself the Lord of the Stars, a man who wrote his poems in blood and mysterious letters. And that story, like a nightmare, has become a part of everyone's life. The zodiac did not just kill people, he killed peace. He killed the belief in a safe world. He made people afraid, he made people suspicious of each other, and he made people lose faith in themselves. And in the meantime, the Zodiac sent another letter, this time calling himself the Zodiac Killer, a name that became an obsession for everyone. In the days that followed, the letters continued to arrive. Each letter was a piece of a giant puzzle, a game that only the Zodiac could win. He challenged the legions, he taunted them, and he sent them new codes, more complex, more difficult. The code breakers tried, they worked tirelessly, but they could not find the answer. And that story, like a curse, has been passed down from generation to generation. A story about a man who declared himself the Lord of the Stars, a man who wrote his poems in blood and mysterious letters. And that story, like a nightmare, has become a part of everyone's life. In the days that followed, the letters continued to arrive. Each letter was a piece of a giant puzzle, a game that only the Zodiac could win. He challenged the legions, he taunted them, and he sent them new codes, more complex, more difficult. The code breakers tried, they worked tirelessly, but they could not find the answer. And that story, like a curse, has been passed down from generation to generation. A story about a man who declared himself the Lord of the Stars, a man who wrote his poems in blood and mysterious letters. And that story, like a nightmare, has become a part of everyone's life. Just as the stars have always been there, unchanging, so has the Zodiac. It has become part of the universe, a force of chaos and death. And meanwhile, the seekers have continued to search, but they have found nothing. They have searched for a man, but they have found only a shadow. And that shadow, like an ancient tale, has been passed down from generation to generation. When Caius and his companions returned to Nova Roma, bearing the scroll and the priestess's mysterious prophecy, the city remained in a tense silence. Their words, of a cursed soul and a chosen successor, were met with indifferent shakes of the head and skeptical looks. Fairy tales are for children, they said, we need a real murderer, not a ghost. But in the hearts of the young scholars, the words rang like a death knell. Fear had begun to creep into the group, like a venomous snake slithering into a rat-infested cave. Each of the group now looked at each other with a strange look. Caius, the leader, had begun to doubt his own closest friends. Was it Marcus, the intelligent but temperamental Roman obsessed with the stars? Or was it Lyra, the native girl gifted in astronomy, who kept a secret in her eyes? Every word, every action was reinterpreted, searching for a sign, a proof of the terrible prophecy. And then, the Zodiac appeared again. This time, he did not kill on a deserted street or in a park, but attacked a postman who used to work in the Imperial Library. The victim was found right in front of the library, and on his chest, the zodiac symbol was drawn in blood. This time, he left behind a piece of an astrological map, a map that showed the way to an ancient temple where the Romans and the Indians once worshipped the gods. On that piece of paper, a single line was written: "When the time is right, the ritual will be completed." The case sent shockwaves through the scholarly community. The killer had not only murdered, he had challenged their very knowledge. Caius and his friends tried to decipher the star map, but they could not. Every letter, every line seemed like a cruel joke. It was not an ordinary map, but a labyrinth of stars. It was a reflection of the mind of a madman. But then, the native girl, Lyra, made a startling discovery. She found another ancient scroll, written in a long-forgotten language. In it, a story was told of an evil spirit, a being cursed by the stars. The scroll described a sacrificial ritual, a ritual that could only be performed at a certain time of year. "This is not a code," she said, "this is a map. The map of a cursed man. It is not a series of letters, but a series of stars. Each constellation is a step, each star is a path." But then, something terrible happened. Marcus, who had always been obsessed with the stars, disappeared. He left behind a letter written in a forgotten language. In the letter, he wrote that he had found the answer, and he would go where the Zodiac had directed him. Caius and Lyra tried to find Marcus, but they could not. He was like a shadow, a man who had vanished into thin air. They searched the forests, the caves, the hills, but they found nothing. And in the meantime, the Zodiac sent another letter. This time, he called himself the Guide, a name that became an obsession for everyone. In that letter, the Zodiac taunted them. He said that he had found his successor, and he would show them the path to greatness. He said that he would never die, for he was part of the stars. He said that he would be reborn, and that he would return to complete his ritual. The curse of the Zodiac became more than a story about murders, it became a story about a forgotten truth. A truth about curses, about old gods, and about stars. And that story, like a nightmare, became a part of everyone's life. In the days that followed, the letters continued to arrive. Each letter was a piece of a giant puzzle, a game that only the Zodiac could win. He challenged the legions, he taunted them, and he sent them new codes, more complex, more difficult. The code breakers tried, they worked tirelessly, but they could not find the answer. And that story, like a curse, has been passed down from generation to generation. A story about a man who declared himself the Lord of the Stars, a man who wrote his poems in blood and mysterious letters. And that story, like a nightmare, has become a part of everyone's life. The Zodiac did not just kill people, he killed peace. He killed the belief in a safe world. He made people afraid, he made people suspicious of each other, and he made people lose faith in themselves. And in the meantime, the Zodiac sent another letter, this time calling himself the Zodiac Killer, a name that became an obsession for everyone. Just as the stars have always been there, unchanging, so has the Zodiac. It has become part of the universe, a force of chaos and death. And meanwhile, the seekers have continued to search, but they have found nothing. They have searched for a man, but they have found only a shadow. And that shadow, like an ancient tale, has been passed down from generation to generation. Marcus's letter plunged Caius and Lyra into a cold despair. The letter was not just a farewell, but a confession. Marcus wrote that he had found the answer in the stars, that the Zodiac had spoken to him, and that he was the one chosen to continue the ritual. "Do not seek me," the letter read, "there is only one path to eternity. And I have found it." The suspicion had become a living monster now. Lyra looked at Caius, and there was a fear in her eyes that he had never seen before. "The prophecy," she whispered, "one of us will be the heir." Caius looked back at her, and in his heart, a question rang out: was Marcus really the Zodiac? Was Lyra trying to lure him into a trap? Was he, Caius, also under the curse of the stars? Their search had become less a search for a murderer and more a battle against themselves. Every step, every word, every glance was torture. They followed the directions of the zodiac star chart, passing through winding hills and flowing rivers. The road seemed to never end, and the whispers of the wind seemed to carry stories of those who had walked this path before and never returned. One night, as they sat by a small fire, Lyra said, "The Zodiac is not a man. He is a shadow, a spirit caught between two worlds. He needs a body to perform his rituals." Her voice trembled, as if she were saying something she did not want to say. "The code is not a code of the stars, but a code of a death written long ago." Caius looked at her, and there was doubt in his eyes. "And how do you know that?" he asked. Lyra did not answer. She just looked into the fire, as if she were searching for an answer there. He knew she was keeping a secret he could not decipher. And that secret, like a shadow, grew in his mind. Finally, they reached the ancient temple. It was not a magnificent temple, but a ruin. A ruin of a forgotten civilization, a place where snakes and eagles were once worshipped. The ruin stood on top of a high hill, and from there, they could see the entire valley. And there, right in front of the temple gate, they saw something. It was a statue. A statue of a man in robes, with the symbol of the zodiac painted on his chest. But as they got closer, they realized that it was not a statue, but Marcus. He stood there, his eyes staring into space, a creepy smile on his lips. He was no longer Marcus, but a shadow of a possessed man. He looked at them, and he said, "You are too late." His voice was not Marcus's, but the voice of someone who had lived long ago. "The ceremony has begun, and you will be the sacrifices." Marcus began to recite an ancient curse, a curse in a forgotten language. And as he read, the stars in the sky began to twinkle, as if they were listening. Lyra understood what was happening. She knew that Marcus was possessed by the spirit of the Zodiac. And she knew that she had to do something. No. She screamed, and she threw a sacred stone at Marcus. The stone hit him in the chest, and he fell. The Zodiac spirit left his body, like black smoke. It rose into the sky, and then, it was gone, as if it had never existed. Caius and Lyra rushed to Marcus's side. He was still alive, but he was no longer Marcus. His eyes were empty, and he could not speak. His soul had been taken by the Zodiac, and now, he was nothing more than an empty shell. And then, something terrible happened. A scroll of parchment fell from the sky, and it landed right in front of them. On the scroll, the symbol of the Zodiac was drawn, and a single line was written: "The successor has been chosen." This story will never end. Lyra looked at Caius, and there was horror in her eyes. She knew that Marcus had not been the heir, but a sacrifice. And she knew that the Zodiac had not died. He had found a new body. And that body was Caius. Caius looked at the scroll, and in his heart, a sentence echoed. "I will never die, for I am part of the stars. I will be reborn, and I will return to complete my ritual." The voice was not his, but the Zodiac's. The light of the stars shone in Caius's eyes, and the sinister smile on his lips became a sign of doom. Lyra stood there, unable to move, unable to speak, only able to watch as her best friend was consumed by an ancient curse. The voice of the Zodiac rang out from Caius's mouth, not a mere threat, but a whisper of a universe gone mad. "I am the Zodiac Killer," the voice echoed, "and I have returned. The ritual will be completed, and the world will know my greatness." Lyra's horror was replaced by a cold fury. She turned to see Marcus lying on the stone floor, motionless, lifeless. She knew she couldn't leave her friend. With the strength of a woman stretched to the limit, she tried to lift Marcus. He felt heavy, as if his body were nothing more than an empty shell. She fled, Marcus in her arms, the curses of the Zodiac echoing behind her. "You cannot escape your fate, Lyra." Caius's voice roared, "You are part of the ritual too." She fled into the darkness of the forest, where the whispers of the old gods had become a fear. As she fled, she remembered the priestess' prophecy: one of them will be the heir. She had believed that Marcus was the one, but she was wrong. Caius was the chosen one. And now, she was the only one who could stop him. She knew that she had to return to the priestess' cave, where she could find an answer. After a long and tiring journey, Lyra reached the cave. The priestess greeted her, and she looked into Lyra's weary face. She knew that her prophecy had come true. "The curse has found a new body," the priestess said, "and it will not stop until the ritual is complete. But to find that star, she must pass a test. A test that only one can survive. She must travel through a maze of stars, a maze that can only be seen in dreams. She must face her own fears, and she must accept that she may have to kill her best friend to save the world. Lyra looked at the priestess, and she said, "I will go." She knew that she might never return, but she had no choice. She knew that she had to do something, before the Zodiac could complete his ritual. And she knew that she had to do something to save her friend. When Lyra opened her eyes, she found herself lying on the cold ground, beside a slowly waking Caius. He looked at her, his eyes still a little bewildered, but the light had returned to them. "Lyra, what happened?" he asked, his voice trembling. She held him tight, feeling his warmth, and in that moment, she knew she had succeeded. But the story was not over. When they rose, they saw a great black cloud hanging in the sky, like a scar across the night sky. The cloud had transformed into a face with eyes that sparkled like two dead stars. "You have freed me," the voice of the Zodiac said from the cloud, "and now I will not need a body to complete my ritual." Lyra and Caius looked at each other. They knew they had to do something. They couldn't let the Zodiac destroy the world. Lyra looked at the obsidian knife in her hand, and she knew that the knife wasn't a weapon, but a symbol. A symbol of sacrifice and oath. They returned to the priestess's cave, and they told their story. The priestess listened, and she nodded. "The curse has been cast," she said, "but it can also be broken. The star of rebirth and death is not just you, Lyra, but both of you." She pointed to an ancient stone statue, a statue of a man and a woman holding hands. Only the power of love can destroy the spirit of chaos. Caius and Lyra looked at each other, and they knew they had to do something. They went to the statue, and they held hands, like the statue. And as they held hands, a bright white light shone upon them. The light rose into the sky, and it shone upon the dark cloud of the Zodiac. The cloud began to part, and the Zodiac screamed, a scream of a trapped soul. "No!" The voice of the Zodiac roared, "You cannot destroy me. I am part of the universe." But the cloud continued to disperse, and the Zodiac spirit began to disappear. Finally, the cloud cleared, and the sky returned to its former state, with sparkling stars. Caius and Lyra stood there, tired but happy. They had saved the world, but they had paid a price. They had sacrificed a part of themselves, a part of their innocence. They had become the guardians of the stars, the ones who had broken the curse of the Zodiac. The story of the Zodiac has ended, but a new story has begun. A story of Lyra and Caius, who fought evil and won. And that story, like a curse broken, has become part of the tales told in the dark nights, a story of love and sacrifice.